what I'll do is I'll run through the session this evening. When we get to the end, I'll let you know. If you need to leave, you can leave. But if you want to listen to the answers of anybody's questions, you're more than welcome to hang on. And I do try and answer everybody's questions afterwards. So if you want to hang on, that's up to you, and I will answer everybody's questions if they have been asked. Okay, I'm also going to get you to think a lot about your own CV. So you don't have to have it in front of you, but if you've got a reasonable idea about what your CV currently looks like, that's going to help, because I'm going to give you some hints and tips in terms of trying to figure out whether your CV is effective yet or not. And if it isn't, of course, we're going to deal with quite a lot of things on how to address it and make it better. So let's get cracking. In terms of the CV session, I'm going to spend most time on the CV in the great scheme of things, but we were going to talk about LinkedIn to some degree. I'm just going to touch the most important parts of LinkedIn. But it's important that you understand who on earth we are, because you've been invited via TalentSpa, provide clients with CV writing, interview coaching, LinkedIn writing advice. The reason I mention this is to explain who on earth we are, of course, but also to give you the confidence that what we do, we know works. Our day jobs are finding people more interviews through providing them with better marketing material, and principally that means the CV and the LinkedIn profile. My own background, just to give you hopefully a little bit more comfort factor and confidence about that, is that I have been an employer and recruited people in that sense. I've worked in recruitment, both contract and permanent. I've reviewed probably thousands, probably knocking on for 10,000 odd CVs now in my time with this business, and written a fair few CVs as well. So not trying to big myself up, just trying to give you the confidence that we see the market from enough angles, the two biggest angles probably being IT and finance. And this has been targeted mainly at IT people this evening, which seems to follow through from the job descriptions I've just seen of you guys that contributed to that. So yeah, we understand the market, we know what works, and so what we're going to cover this evening is relevant and topical. It isn't just some mad idea that we woke up this morning with. The guys that I work with, and gals indeed, have similar backgrounds, some published authors. That will become apparent how important that is as a skill later. Now, interestingly, there's going to be a fair few cliches thrown around this evening, I'm afraid. One of those is hot skills. And hot skills vary enormously, and particularly in IT. What was hot 5 years ago isn't necessarily so now. Knowing what those hot skills are in the marketplace is really important before you set about making an effective CV or LinkedIn profile. So if you don't know what the hot skills are, what the employers and recruiters are looking for, and what will excite them, you're already on the back foot. It's really important to understand what they are, and that will become apparent later as well. Bottom line is we know what we do works, and to prove that, on the screen now is an email we had from somebody who we helped quite recently, last month in fact. And the interesting thing here is that this person had been really struggling in the marketplace, and had been struggling to get any interviews or attention from employers, recruiters, or anybody. They're quite an average person, had got some skills, just presenting them in completely the wrong way. And so when we saw their CV, we said, look, you really got some issues here, fix the issues. Lo and behold, almost overnight, that dramatic, this person started getting interest and attention from recruiters and employers, as you can see from the quote. So that's an extract from quite a nice email we got, just saying basically, thanks very much, it truly does work. And that is genuinely the case. These kind of things do actually happen. Now, in terms of working out whether you've got a good CV or a bad CV, before we actually look at sorting your CV, let's just take a look at whether you've got a document that's going to work in the marketplace or not. Now, a lot of people tend to ask us during the sessions or towards the end or when we're talking with people, how effective, how big a difference can having a good CV make? Now, we can only go on the stats that we collect from working with our clients. but we know, on average, hence the comment at the bottom of this slide, if you get your CV sorted and you position it well and align it with those hot skills in the marketplace, typically you can see a substantial double-digit increase in interview success rate, i.e. getting more interviews. And with our stats, it's comfortably, the average is comfortably in that 30 to 50% increase in getting interviews. So it's quite dramatic. Now there are extremes. The guy that sent us that email, if you did the maths on him, it would be in the hundreds of percent, because he literally had nothing for 3 years and then all of a sudden started getting interviews. So it was a massive increase, and there are others slightly less than this, but the average is in that 30 to 50% increase level, so it's substantial. Now the warning signs, now to try, so give some thought now to what your CV looks like and what it contains. If you're going to market just in effect with a list of things, so just the jobs, the qualifications, the contact details, your hobbies and interests, technical skills, if that's all you're presenting to the market, that's a bad sign. Again, it'll become clear as to why shortly, but we would say that's a warning sign at the very least that things may not be as good with your CV as you might like them to be. Secondly, if you're going to market with the same format of CV that you had when you left education, so whether that be school, college or university, doesn't really matter, if all you've done really is add to your document over time and not really kept a view on where the market's at, again, that's a warning sign, particularly if you've got a career more than 5 years old or longer. It would indicate your CV is not as effective as it should be. As I hinted at, if you're not positioning your marketing collateral, your CV, and to an extent your LinkedIn profile to what the hot skills are in the marketplace and what's being demanded at this moment in time, it's very easy to get rejected simply because you appear to be, irrespective of whether you're a good candidate or not, on paper, metaphorically speaking, you will appear to be uncompetitive in the marketplace. That's a really important issue because you may or may not know, roughly you're going to get 5 to 20 seconds of somebody's time during the filtering process. Unless you're very lucky and you're one of literally a handful of applicants, you will not get much more than that 5 to 20 seconds of somebody's time before somebody's decided whether you should be considered further in the job application process or not. I ran an event last week, a webinar like this, and we managed to get hold of a guest speaker from Michael Page, and they were telling us and the audience at that moment in time of a job that they'd advertised for a fairly senior finance role. I think it was a finance director, in fact, so a fairly senior role. There's not many finance directors in the great scheme of things, yet they had 1,500 applicants for that one job. This was earlier in this year. 1,500 applicants. Each one of those people had to be dealt with, however briefly they had to be dealt with. Somebody had to look at a piece of paper or something on the screen or whatever. Amongst those applications included housewives, welders, all sorts. And although I don't mean any derogatory comments towards those two pursuits, they were clearly not people qualified to do the job. Why they had applied is a mystery, but they had to be dealt with. Now, if you've got 1,500 bits of anything to go through, you can imagine you're not going to get a lot of time. You will not want to generate a lot of time or effort reviewing that amount of information because you only want to interview 3 to 5 people. The guy from Michael Page said we wanted to interview 5 people, absolute tops for the client, 3 ideally. 1,500 down to 3. So imagine how much time each CV gets. That sort of links to the next cliche of this evening, target audience. Who's your target audience? Well, it's a mixture. It could be recruiters, hiring managers, the employer in other words, HR people, be they embedded within the organization or part of some kind of outplaced third-party intermediary. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, but it's a bunch of people who are going to affect a decision on your application. So you've got to get inside their heads. In an ideal world, your CV is going to be a combination of, I know what the recruiter's looking for, I know what the decision maker's looking for, and I need to get that message across on my CV. And if you're not comfortable with that, again, you'll be on the back foot. So our view, third cliche of the evening, I think we're up to now, business case is what you should be presenting to your audience, not a list of stuff. Bad CVs, just a list of things. So if you're literally just saying, here's my qualifications, here's my technical skills, these are the companies I've worked for, here are my duties and responsibilities, this is how you can get hold of me, this is where I live, these are the jobs and employers that I've worked for, that's not a great marketing document. You need to be presenting a strong business case, a justification as to why somebody's going to sink X number of thousand quid in you a year and what return you have to offer on that investment. So I often say at this point, just think of something that you've bought recently, car, computer, house, boat if you're lucky enough, anything reasonably high ticket item, even a domestic appliance. It's highly unlikely you'll have just bought that on being presented with or having researched a list of statistics. You won't have bought a car because it's 5 meters long, a couple of meters wide and 1.5 meters tall, and it's got wheels of a certain diameter. That won't have been the persuading argument. Might have been a factor, but it won't have been the persuading argument. There'll be a whole host of other things, brand loyalty, emotion, marketing images being thrust at you, your own perceptions about what makes a brand and quality, blah, 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 fuel economy, safety, optional extras, equipment levels, performance. There'll be a whole host of things that will have been presented to you, however sophisticated or not, which you will have made a decision on. If you've had to seek investment at work for anything, you'll have had to seek somebody's authority, or authorization I should say. You'll have had to present a business case as to why you should buy, upgrade the IT platform, so to go from XP to 7, 7 to 8, 8 to 8.1, although I guess that was free, or to go from somebody's hardware to somebody else's hardware, to upgrade the servers, or to get some new kit, or to get some new resource. You can't just turn up and say, give me £1 million, I'm going to do this. People are going to want a reason as to why you want that £1 million, or even 20,000 quid. You have to present yourself to the market in the same way, and a lot of people have a problem with that. A lot of people don't like that, but I'm afraid it's where the market's at. If you're going to be costing a certain amount of money a month, a year, whatever, you need to be presenting to that audience the return you're likely to offer on that investment, and that is your business case. Second way of assessing your CV. So we've talked about some qualitative things. Are you just presenting a list? Are you actually aligning your CV to the hot skills? But the absolute acid test, if you're active in the market and you can collect these stats, or if you're about to be active in the market and therefore you now can collect these stats, it's sort of self-explanatory, but a lot of people fail to recognize the importance of this statistic, and that is the interview to application ratio. If you apply for 10 jobs, let's say mythical 10 jobs, they're jobs that you could realistically perform based on the evidence you have at your disposal. So they're not, it's unrealistic if you're a supermarket checkout operator to go to a nuclear submarine captain. You know, nobody is going to be able to put together a CV that makes a strong business case as to why that should happen. It clearly is not going to happen. But if you're going from project manager to senior project manager to PMO, analyst to senior analyst, project manager to BA possibly, or BA to project manager, all logical moves that you could imagine would be realistic. So you're applying for 10 of those jobs. If you're not getting any interviews at all, obviously that's bad. But a lot of people fail to see what the real issue is, and the issue is the CV. The message you're sending to your audience is not compelling enough for them to want to do something. Don't take it personally if you're in that camp, because the audience rarely knows you from Adam. So it's not a personal reflection on you, other than the message you're sending out into the marketplace is ineffective. What it's all to do with is that message. If you get that message sorted and you can justifiably present a stronger message, a business case to that audience, I can guarantee you will get more interest and more interviews. And that email that I showed you earlier from the chap who had really struggled, same chap at the end of the day, same skills, been really struggling for 3 years. None of that had changed what he was capable of. All we changed was his message that he was communicating to his target audience. Target audience didn't change. His skill set didn't change. All we changed was the message being communicated. As soon as that message became more compelling to the target audience, bump, getting interest in interviews. So that's the acid test. If you're in the realms of the 8, 9, 10 interviews out of those 10 applications, then to be honest, there's nothing wrong with your CV. However critical I might be, if I looked at it from a technical point of view and I said, I really don't like that, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. It doesn't matter what anybody tells you about it. If it's getting you interviews, to enough interviews for you to feel comfortable that you can convert them into second interviews or assessment centres or decisions to actually appoint you, be that on a contract or a permanent basis, doesn't really matter. If it's getting that interest and traction, that's a good thing. And it points to the fact that there's something on that CV is doing its magic. But if you're not getting enough interviews, and enough is a statistic you have to make a decision about, but crudely, less than 50% hit rate for jobs you could perform indicates there's something wrong with the CV. More than 50%, it's then a decision as to whether you need to improve it or not, and only you can make that decision. But that's the acid test. So for those that are in the problem area, or think you might be in the problem area, or you realise it is a problem area at some stage in the future, there are two really big messages from this evening. One is you've got to go to market with a business case. That's probably the most important message I could get across to you, and I'll show you how later. The second most important thing is if you have a problem, please do something about it. You've got two options. You either sort it out yourself, following the steps we'll talk about this evening, or you get somebody to sort it for you. So you're seeking professional help, much like you would with anything else, getting your car fixed, getting your plumbing sorted. You can get your CV sorted as well. And if you go down that route, we'd obviously rather like it for you to choose us rather than anybody else. But those are the two main options. But the thing I really would encourage is please do something. Don't take the do nothing option, because nothing will change, not anytime soon. The only way people who've got a really bad CV get interviews is when the market's actually reached saturation point and it's almost desperate. In desperation, the employer says, well, we can only interview the people that have applied. At the moment, if there are hundreds, if not thousands of applicants, they have the luxury of choice. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the analysis side. So now hopefully you've got some indicators. You can look at your CV, you can look at the stats if you're active in the marketplace, or when you get active in the marketplace, you can look at the stats, make a decision on whether you've got an effective document or not. If you think, okay, what represents an effective document? I'm not really sure about whether I'm going to be successful in the marketplace or not. Well, structurally wise, and structure is the least important aspect of the CV. It's all about content, but structurally wise, the things that are on screen now are a nice logical flow of how we lay out a CV that we know works. And again, just going to market with these headings and filling it with any old rubbish is not the answer. It's not going to cause a radical change in your success rate. It is all about the content, and we'll talk about that. But this structure gives some kind of meaningful flow to the document and makes an effective CV. And the areas we're going to look at this evening in most detail, we'll touch everything, but the three areas I really want to focus on are the highlighted areas now. Because if you get those right, the right content, those three areas are the bits that make the strongest part of the business case as to why somebody should be interviewing you. And it is interviewing you as opposed to hiring you. The hiring consideration is a factor, but the CV's job is to get you the interview from which other things will flow. So we're going to talk a lot about those three areas. Firstly then, and I'll show you a real-life example shortly when I've gone through a couple of sections. I'm also going to show you some content to back up what the content should look like and the kind of structure to it. So imagine your document. Again, maybe reflect on what you've currently got. A lot of people tend to open up with some kind of opening summary. We tend to call it a professional or executive summary. What you call it doesn't really matter within reason. Some people call it a personal summary, personal statement, personal profile. Again, it doesn't really matter what you call it in the great scheme of things. Content's key. What you need to do here, and what many people get wrong, is actually describe what on earth you are. Now, what on earth you are is not necessarily a replication of your precise job title, particularly if you've got an odd job title that isn't well known in the marketplace. So you need to be a bit generic here, or at least give some consideration to what works in the marketplace. So the easy ones are if you're a project manager, doesn't matter what level you are at the moment, let's just imagine you're a project manager and you're applying for project management jobs. You need to be reflecting that's exactly what you are. You need to make that statement pretty clear on your CV pretty quickly. Now remember that example I gave you of the Michael Page guy who was online with us saying he'd had 1,500 applicants for a finance director role. Now, one of the biggest frustrations in that kind of case, as I hinted at, was that he's getting applications from all sorts of people who are nowhere near the finance space, let alone the right level of seniority. So the people that stood out in his mind were the people that said, crudely, I am an experienced finance director. They'd at least reached some kind of point at which somebody had given them a little bit more time and attention. Anybody that they saw that wasn't making that message clear pretty quickly, it's so easy to bat them away. Now the danger is, if you've got a CV right now and you are a project manager, IT project manager in some kind of discipline, and you don't choose to get that message across until well down page 1 or page 2 of your CV, and you're applying for jobs where it's clear that there is a requirement for an IT project manager, the danger is you'll be hoovered up into that reject pile within 5, 20 seconds, probably less than 20 to be honest, maybe 5 or 10 seconds. Somebody's going to quickly look at your document, think, what on earth is this? I've got too many people to deal with. I'm pretty confident I'm going to find somebody in here who's a relevant candidate, who's a valid candidate. It's not clear. This individual doesn't make it clear as to what they are. They get rejected. And that happens so many times. So if you're not explaining what you are pretty quickly and that isn't relevant to the target audience's expectations, you could get rejected even though technically you're a great candidate for the role. So that's very simple but very, very important part of this opening statement. The second thing is you need to get across your value proposition, cliche number, where are we now, 4. So value proposition is all about this return on investment. If somebody's going to pay you 300 quid a day or £36,000 a year or whatever it is, they're going to expect a return on that investment. You've got to make it pretty clear pretty quickly, show you an example in a minute, what that return's likely to be. Ask yourself your question, have you got that in your opening statement on your CV? Link to that, things that you're particularly good at. A handful of things. Most people, whatever level of experience they have, tend to be pretty good at a core nugget of things. 2, 3, 4 things, maybe 5 at a stretch. Things that really define you, that you know you could add value in. You need to be talking about those. And finally, but probably understandably, you need to link all that lot to what the marketplace is expecting, these infamous hot skills. You get that right, you land up with a very powerful opening statement and a very clear justification of why somebody should be taking you seriously. On the screen now is an example of an opening statement for an individual. Now, it doesn't matter what level you're at, so ignore the fact this is a finance director. That's not important. Anybody, but whether you've just graduated, whether you've got 25 years experience or anything in between, any sector you're working in, any job title, any country, everybody can write something like this. What are they? They're a finance director. What's the value proposition? Loosely, it's around this protecting cash flow and profitability, if you're reading this paragraph. What are they good at? There's a handful of things. And are they aligned with the hot skills in the marketplace? Well, we don't know in truth. We don't know the individual and we don't know the jobs they're going for, but it would seem to make sense that they have got some skills that are relevant to the marketplace. Common sense would lead us to believe that. Now, importantly, if you've got a statement like this, some kind of opening statement on your CV, what most people tend to have, if they're reflecting anything, they're reflecting a whole load of behavioural skills. So if you've got a CV that mentions anything to do with enthusiasm, commitment, dedication, interpersonal skills, communication skills, dynamism, working in a team or as an individual, any of that nonsense, the first thing you need to do is root that all out, get rid, because it is wholly pointless. And the reason why it's wholly pointless, and it's seen as maybe a bit controversial to say it because most people have it out on their CV. I know because I review tens of CVs a day. Most people in all job functions have that kind of drivel at the top of the CV. And that's how it's seen. Nobody will tell you to your face, or very few people will tell you to your face, I'm afraid, except people like us. But it is drivel. Why is it drivel? You can't prove any of it. How can you prove your levels of enthusiasm on a piece of paper or on the screen? with your CV? You can't. How do you prove dynamism? You can't. How do you prove you can work in a team or as an individual? You can't. So why put any of that stuff if you can't justify it? Now, a lot of people at this point say, yeah, but I proved that in you. Well, good luck. If you're getting the interviews, great. That works then, in fairness. I take my hat off to you, you can prove them. But most people in that camp are the ones that tend not to get the interview. Already the recruiter looking at your CV will be thinking, here we go again. Out of the 1,500 applicants I've had, 90-odd% of them all claim to be enthusiastic team players who can work as an individual, who are committed, who will give 110% and have great communication skills. Irrespective of the job, everybody tends to go at the market with that kind of message, and it is wholly pointless. It winds the recruiter up. It really winds the employer up. Unfortunately, they'll very rarely tell you to your face that that's a problem, and the cycle goes on. But if you're not getting interviews or not getting enough interviews and you're going to market with that message, that's part of the reason why you're not getting the interviews. If you are getting interviews with that message, then there must be something else on your CV that's counterbalancing that. But for a lot of people, the death point, if you like, the final nail in the coffin is set already by that opening statement and focusing on behavioural traits rather than functional or technical skills. This paragraph on screen, this opening statement, has none of that stuff within it. It's just talking about functional, technical, demonstrable skills, all of which could be proven on the CV at a later stage. So it's really important. So remember, this is the first part of building a strong business case as to why somebody should be interested in you. And the reason why somebody should be interested in you is because you are a valid applicant for the role, you're in the right space, you've got strengths that are relevant to the marketplace and their expectations, and there's a hint that you could prove some of this later on, which we will indeed do so. So that's the first part. The second of the three key areas is an area we call key skills or areas of expertise or expertise. Again, it doesn't really matter what you call it, but it's a really useful area aesthetically and digitally for reasons I'll explain. I will show you, as I said, a real-life example of the CV shortly, in fact, after this section. But before I get into the detail of this section, there's another fact that I wanted to get across, which is highlighted at the bottom of the slide, and that is that when you send your CV off to anybody, the vast majority of the people looking at it, it's the only means they have to make a decision about you. And a lot of people forget this, or they don't quite see the importance of this, and they sort of take it as read or take it for granted or think, well, how else are they going to make a decision? And that is exactly the point. A lot of folks say to me, yes, I'll prove all of this stuff that you've criticised me about at interview. And I say, good, okay, how many interviews have you had over the last X number of weeks? Oh, none, but it's early days yet, or it's a tough economic climate, or this or that. Failing to realise that if they're applying for even just one job, if it's relevant to their skill set and they're not getting an interview, somebody decided that they weren't worth interviewing. The only reason they can make that decision, or in the vast majority of cases, the only way they can make that decision is based on the content of what you send them, your marketing message, your CV, and to a degree your LinkedIn profile. So if your CV is not effective, how else is anybody going to make a decision about you? There's no crystal ball. There's no kind of strange ethereal experience that recruiters or employers go through. They can't fill in the gaps. They're not going to create a picture in their mind of what you really are like and sort of say, oh, the CV's bad, but I can imagine this person's really good. It doesn't happen. They look at the CV, they make a decision, end of. Bad information on the CV, not going to get the interview, and you can put it down to whatever reason you like, but the bottom line is the CV is causing you a problem, so you need to get it fixed. And that situation will not change until the market goes completely around the other way and you become the only applicant in the market. That's highly unlikely anytime soon. So really important. Now for the mathematicians amongst you, the difference between 100% of everybody in the market, recruiters and hiring managers that is, and 92% is people who know you already or people who've been recommended to you via word of mouth. Positively or negatively, doesn't matter, but that's the sort of missing 8%. Not many, in other words. Most people can only be judged on the CV that they send for each application. So if your CV is not effective, that's why you don't get interviews, and it's nothing to do with the state of the economy, nothing to do with lots of other people in the marketplace. That may well be true. In fact, both facts may be true. It doesn't take away from the fact that your message wasn't as compelling as somebody else's. And if you look at it, if you were able to look at the process, you'd realise that your CV was letting you down for those that aren't as successful as they'd like to be. But nothing to do with your technical ability or suitability for the job in hand. It's got everything to do with somebody's perception of those things via the document you sent them. So this second area, this key skills bit, is a really useful area. As I said, aesthetically, it breaks the CV up. There's going to be some bullet points, which I'll show you shortly, that describe technical or functional skills that you may have, or at least the most important ones. This is not an area for a list of lots and lots of purely technical IT-related skills. It's just to reaffirm certain skills the marketplace is looking for, some of which the headline news may be technical or functional skills, like Prince2 project management, for example, or ICEB testing. That kind of thing may be mentioned here, but it's not the place for all of the different levels of software programming that you have, or hardware experience that you have, or server technology or virtualization technology. This isn't the place. Headline news, yes, not detail. There's somewhere else for the detail. So aesthetically, it works well. It also works well for databases of any kind. So as soon as your CV hits a job board or an employer direct advert, it's likely to go into some kind of database. So you might get viewed speculatively for that job at that moment in time, but you're also going to get picked out of databases for jobs that recruiters may be about to work on. And of course, you want to make sure that you appear higher up and more often than average. And the way you do that, in part, is have good content in the CV, so that when recruiters and employers are entering keywords or phrases into their search engines, you pop up more often than not. This area on the CV is a really good way of influencing that. Here are just a few things that typically you might put on the CV. Again, don't worry about the examples per se. They're just indicative of the kind of length. So it's a 2, 3, 4 word kind of statement. It's a bullet point. There's no fancy explanation. And it's technical or functional things. So again, not enthusiasm, not communication skills, not teamworking skills, none of that stuff that you can hardly prove. It's functional technical skills that mean something and that could be proven later on the CV. Okay, let me show you an example of this as it appears on paper before we go any further. So just appearing on screen now is actually Matt's CV. Matt runs the business. So opening statement, what is he? What's his value proposition? What's he good at? Aligned to hot skills, we imagine. Then this second area, he's called expertise. I say it doesn't really matter what you call it, but the bullet points are things that he can deliver, which could be proven on the CV and certainly at interview, and which are phrases and terms that we know people tend to search for his kind of work and skill base. Now that's 2/3 of building a strong business case. We'll come on to the career highlights now, which is sort of lurking at the bottom of this particular slide, but that just gives you a level for the structure and how it all pins together. Notice just a couple of things actually. We'll talk about this later. All we've got at the top of the CV, Matt's name and some contact details. Not got his personal details, not where he lives, his education. We're not jumping straight into where he works. Not got any waffle about behavioural skills, and certainly no information about date of birth, marital status, family, hobbies, interests. So if any of that's on page 1 of the CV, I would counsel you against that. It doesn't differentiate you. Okay, so let's move on to the career highlights. So by looking at these two sections, in effect, if you are harsh, you could say, okay, big deal, you've made some claims. At least they seem to be functional or technical claims rather than behavioural, so that's strong, but there's no evidence as such. So career highlights is a really good place to put some evidence. Now, if there are any out-and-out contractors watching this evening, there is a slightly different format. If you're interested in that, and when I say out-and-out contractors, I mean if you've got a career spanning, I don't know, at least 5 years, most recently as a contractor, you intend to be a contractor going forwards as far as you can see. If you're interested in a slightly different format for the CV, put a question in the toolbar. I'll come back to that later. I don't have time to talk about the two separate formats, but if you're an out-and-out contractor, there is possibly another way of structuring the CV that's slightly different from what you're going to see now. The principles remain the same though. You're still building a business case and you need to provide evidence. Now, career highlights is a great place to put that evidence. It's really important that you can write good content. If you struggle with being able to explain what you're good at and getting inside the head of your target audience and writing good content about what you've got to offer the world, then my strongest recommendation would be don't fight that. Don't try and battle it, do it, get it horribly wrong. Seek professional help and get it sorted, because this is a really critical area of the CV. We use a methodology to build these highlights called STAR. It's not new, that's been around. There's all sorts of variants on a similar theme. It stands for Situation, Task, Actions, Result. It's a really good way of writing concise content about what you're able to do. It's also a really useful way of answering competency-based questions. If you can get this kind of methodology sorted in your head and think of good examples quickly and then articulate them in an interview, it's a really useful way of being able to take complicated events yet give a nice, concise, crisp, clear answer. But from the CV's point of view, we'd ordinarily recommend for the average permie or contractor who doesn't really work with recruiters who understand the contract market, and there are plenty of them, unfortunately, but if that's the case, we'd recommend 3 on the CV for reasons that will become clear later. And here's an example of a career highlight of, well, it's off Matt's CV, in fact. Again, I'm not going to read it verbatim. You can read it yourselves, and I'll explain how it's compartmentalized. So the first sentence of this paragraph is the situation. It's the headline news, if you like, the scene setter. What on earth was this all about? And in this case, ERAC stands for Enterprise Rent-A-Car. They acquired a business and it needed sorting out. Matt's task in this situation was he was appointed as ops manager, as you can see, to do a variety of things, basically to sort it out. That was the responsibility resting on his shoulders, if you like. The actions are the bulk of the remaining text, a series of things that Matt did as operations manager, ideally in chronological order, so a nice logical flow. And then the final sentence is the result. And Matt succeeded in rebranding the business and achieving a certain level of profitability within a certain time scale. So that is a career highlight. It's short, it's succinct, it's concise, it's full of information and evidence. There's no kind of nonsense about enthusiasm and dynamism and dedication and commitment. It's just a nice, clear indication of something that he did, which people could equate to and say, yeah, that's what we're looking for in our business. If this person's capable of doing this kind of thing, we're interested in that. Okay, so that's one example. As I say, 3 examples on the CV would be where we were heading for with this. There are some things you need to be careful about, though, with these career highlights. You've got to pick examples that are relevant and strong. Pick a weak example, it looks like failure. Pick something that you enjoyed the most but isn't relevant to your target audience. It just doesn't work. So, again, a bit tongue-in-cheek, but if you chose to pick a career highlight from, I don't know, the early to mid-90s when you got all excited about launching Windows 95 across 15 desktops, yeah, referencing all those kind of details is not going to help your cause, because it dates everything. It looks old-fashioned. It looks irrelevant to the market. There are far better ways of explaining it. Even if you stripped away the references to Windows 95, at least it would make a little bit of a difference, because you could say that you're used to implementing new operating systems would be a better way of explaining it. But you'd be surprised how irrelevant some people's achievements are. They pick the wrong examples because they don't understand what the market's looking for. So it's really important you pick good, strong, relevant examples. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be a sort of a world changer. I mean, Matt's example was quite strong. So he went into Enterprise Rent-A-Car and he was able to affect change and deliver what looked like a meaningful, quite powerful result or outcome. Not everybody is in a job that enables you to do that kind of stuff, and that doesn't matter, because it means you're probably applying for jobs that's not required. So it's all about the relevance, not necessarily the power. If you're a salesperson, if you're selling IT kit, then it would be more important that you got across a message about how many bits of pieces you could sell, be that software or hardware. But if you're actually a fixer, a doer, then or an administrator of some sort, or just working in some kind of passive support function, you just need to give good examples of the work that you've done and the kind of environments that you're used to and infrastructure and frameworks that you've worked within, because that's all your target audience is probably expecting to see. If you've been a project manager, you probably need to give some examples of things you've delivered on time and to budget, and if you haven't, some justification as to why maybe things didn't quite work out, because what your target audience will be expecting to see is examples of that kind of work, and most project managers need to deliver something on time and to budget, or at least to have made a difference by implementing something. When we work with clients who come to us for help, this is where we spend most of the time, because most people undervalue what they've done or have forgotten what they've done sometimes, and often it's the case we're having a discussion with somebody and they mutter something under their breath almost, and we say, hang on a minute, what did you say? And they suddenly reveal a hidden gem. So it's really important. You cannot spend 5 minutes on this. You can't just scribble down a few things and think job done. It takes a good chunk of time to do this properly, and it is worth doing properly. Okay, so that's career highlights. So let's just have a look at Matt's CV again, and we'll just see how these 3 sections sort of hang together. So on the screen right now is Matt's CV, the 3 sections we've spent most time talking about. Exec summary, testing the team, what's he good at, is he a valid candidate for the role basically, and by investing X amount of quid in this person, what return might I get? You know, what kind of benefits is this person going to bring to our organisation? The bullet point key skills, which sort of reflects skills that the target audience will actually be looking for. So if you've done your research and you know what the market's looking for, and as long as you can back up your listed skills with proof, this is a great area for customizing the CV, because you're basically just reflecting what the audience is actually looking for. You're surprised how many people don't do that. They just list stuff because they think it's what the audience is looking for. They don't really know it for a fact. And then the career highlights give the proof to support claims that have been made earlier on the CV. Notice the career highlights are equally balanced. Really important psychological trick. It's without showing an example of one where it's not balanced. If you go to market with your first example, your first career highlight, I don't know, 8 lines deep, so a big, decent, chunky paragraph, which is what a lot of people do. Too much information, by the way. But then what they tend to do is the second highlight, if there is one, tends to be 4 lines deep, and then the third highlight tends to be a couple of lines deep. Guess what? To the reader, they're not stupid at the end of the day, and even if they were, to the average reader, all that looks like is somebody had a great example they're really proud of, might not be relevant, but okay, it's an achievement. Second one just doesn't seem as important, and third one looks like they couldn't be bothered. That's exactly the message you convey. So although it's very subtle, it's a really, really important point. If you go to market with wham bam, here's really the thing that I'm most impressed with in my own life, most people tend to get that wrong because it's not relevant, as I said earlier. Even if they get it right, it tends to be then supported by other examples which look weak, if only because they haven't got the same amount of space devoted to them. So each of the highlights here is equally weighted. Interestingly, the highlights, and this is important again from contractors' point of view, but equally permanent people with a decent career behind them, you can pull these highlights from any point in your life. So you're not forced to follow any chronological order. As yet, we've not talked about chronological order in any way, sense, shape or form. And that's important. You're dictating to some degree what you're revealing to people. You're presenting your business case in the way that you would like to. And as long as it's relevant to the target audience, how you do that's up to you. And we've yet to talk about where Matt's done any of his work, importantly. So if you're opening up your CV, or pretty soon on your CV you're talking about who you're currently working with or most recently worked with, again, it's a bit of a danger sign. You lose control. As soon as people see who you work for, it conjures up all sorts of pictures in their mind, not always positive, because of who you're working for and the job title you may have. You've lost control then. So in this case, we're building a nice business case, and we've yet to mention where Matt's worked, and that is deliberate. So let's take a look at the other CV sections, and the first one of those is, in fact, your career history. So we've built a strong business case in the 3 sections I've talked about. The 4th section is the career history section or experience section or whatever you want to call it, but where you explain what you've been up to. Now broadly, apart from the fact that you could be going in reverse chronological order, which most people tend to do, some don't for a strange reason, but most people tend to get that bit right. But you only need to be detailing and explaining at any level the last roughly 8 to 10 years. Now it depends, this is bespoke of course to individuals. As a broad indicator though, only provide detail for the last 8 to 10 years, because you're not getting an interview based on what happened in the 90s or the 80s or even the 70s. It's just not going to happen. People might be interested in that at a later stage, and you certainly need to account for your time. We'll deal with that later. But detail-wise, you just need the most recent stuff. And when you're detailing it, you want a bit of background. So who on earth you're working for? Don't assume people know who you're working for. Even if you work for a big brand, don't assume people will automatically infer the same thing as you think they should infer. So explain a bit about who you're working for, explain a bit about your role, its duties and responsibilities, but be very modest with those, because anybody in a similar job within a competitor will have similar duties and responsibilities. So just listing those is not differentiating you at all. It just makes you look like a Me Too person. So a bit of duties and responsibilities, but by far the majority of the space should be achievements, things you've done with those duties and responsibilities that have made a difference. That's really important. As far as the earlier career is concerned, if you have one, so if you've got anything beyond that 8 to 10 year horizon, you need to abbreviate that dramatically. As I say, you're not going to get interviewed based on what happened in 1990 something. Very rarely will that be the case anyway. You're going to be interviewed based on what has happened in the last few years. So certainly anything in the 90s, probably even the early noughties realistically these days, certainly anything in the 80s or before, just a line, literally from this date to that date, working at this company, doing this job title, end of. I'll show you an example shortly. Qualifications, continual professional development, any trainings on the job as it were, yes, there's a place for them, but towards the back of the CV rather than the front. There are other ways of getting across. If you're a Prince 2 qualified project manager, you can mention that in your opening statement. So whereas we had the example, an experienced finance director, you could be an experienced Prince 2 qualified, Prince 2 certified project manager, for example, or MBA educated, blah, 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 or ISEB qualified, or ITIL V3, blah, 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 blah. You can get across those key academic or professional qualifications without listing everyone, because if you list things, all you're doing, because most people have skills that are pretty similar, you're just appearing to be the same old, same old. There's loads of people out there who can list their qualifications. Bottom line is, yes, they're important, particularly in IT. There are sort of some things you need to have, but what's going to differentiate you from most of your competitors is your ability to deliver using those qualifications. So that becomes the heartland. As I suggested earlier, personal detail, so address, LinkedIn URL, the mute point where you put that, so it doesn't really matter, but certainly address tends to be something you put towards the back of the CV, not the front. Most people open up with it. Not the end of the world if you do, but it depends how you lay it out. What we're trying to do is avoid giving space to stuff that doesn't differentiate you. And for some people, you want to avoid being part of a postcode lottery. So if you're a contractor particularly and you're willing to travel, you don't want to appear to the target audience to be in the wrong part of the country, irrespective of what you're prepared to do commuting-wise or travelling-wise or staying in a B&B, irrespective of whether you want to relocate or not. If you're a permie, don't give people information that they can actually make or create a negative impression with, like where you currently happen to reside, which you don't know whether it's going to work for or against you, so don't lead with it. As far as the other horrendous thing that people tend to do, again, a bit controversial I know, but references available on request. That's a wholly pointless statement. If people want to seek references on you, they will seek them, whether you've got them on request or not. It's part of the process. You don't have a choice in that. So unless you're specifically asked to provide that information, there's no point in putting it on the CV. It won't putting references available on request will not get you any more or less interviews. It just doesn't make the blindest bit of difference. So instead, focus on providing testimonial evidence that you can source that does add value, particularly if you've got some on LinkedIn. Bring that across, put it on your CV. 1 or 2 examples, maybe people who are managed you or hired you in the past, people who would appear to be credible references. Put some good words that they have said, a bit like they might do on LinkedIn. That's wholly productive. And as far as hobbies and interests are concerned, again, another controversial one. People do it, it's a bad habit. Bad in the sense that what value is it adding? Well, it depends. If you're trying to move into an arena or environment where you've got a genuine passion or interest outside of work, it could be relevant to mention it, in fairness. It's all about relevance and building a business case. If you're just listing stuff because you feel you should, to give some insight into you, how do you know whether the person reading your CV is going to take that positively or not? So don't run risks. Don't go to market with a whole lot of hobbies and interests that could be perceived as introverted or insular, and you'd be surprised what some people think about some sports or extracurricular activities. Don't give people that ammunition. Only put stuff that's relevant to your application or furthering your application. Okay, let's just take a quick look at Matt's CV to show you how it sort of all works and comes together before we move on to a few other bits and pieces and general comments. So you're looking at page 1 of Matt's CV now. You can see on that page the 3 sections we spent most time talking about, then his career history, bottom of page 1. It is important that he's on page 1, but it's not important that it's any higher than it currently appears. Yeah, by definition, most people would have a similar format to this for a permanent style CV or a traditional style CV. Most people would have their career history appearing in the bottom quarter of the CV, of page 1. Okay, if we go to page 2, you'll see that the role that Matt currently has is continued. So he's explained a bit about what he's doing, who he's working for, what his business is all about. He's talking about the team, the kind of involvement that the team has, what they're getting up to, and his role in that. But there's a lot of achievements, a lot of stuff that he's been involved with that is unique to him. Nobody else can claim to have done the same things. That's what you need to focus on. Bottom of page 2, there's an earlier role. And then if you flick to page 3, we'll talk about pages in the CV, length of CV shortly. But page 3, you can see now the balancing part of his career history. His earlier career, 1 line for each thing. Notice in the 90s, just 1 line. The enterprise rent-a-car time is there. Remember, we drew out a career highlight from that time. Doesn't matter that it was a long time ago. It's still a relevant career highlight, still impactful and meaningful. So he's brought that onto page 1, but it's from a time that's now been reduced to 1 line on his CV. That's a really good way of being able to highlight things that you'd like people to see, as long as it's relevant, and not get trapped into the chronological order of things. Because if Matt left it till page 3 of his CV to talk about this great achievement of his in turning around that business division, nobody would read it. Nobody would ever get that far, or very few people would ever get that far. Then his education, personal details, and then recommendations. So 2 really powerful statements from people who are able to testify to Matt's abilities. That's going to add value. Now, for a lot of IT folk, somewhere in here you could have a table with technical skills, and that could be split up in a number of ways. But if you really needed to get programming skills, hardware skills, software skills, knowledge into the CV, you just have a table that would reflect that. So it's all about relevance. It's not relevant to Matt. It would be relevant to somebody who had a particular area of expertise. Okay, so brief moment of reflection. We've covered a lot of ground, and we've still got a little way to go. But hopefully now you'll have a reasonable insight in terms of whether your CV is up to scratch or not. So remember, acid test. If you're not getting the interviews you deserve, it's probably because your CV is not effective. And I know it sounds critical and harsh, but I'm afraid it's just the way it is. Now, you'll have the stats. If you're active in the market, you'll know whether that's true or not. If you're getting enough interviews, your CV is doing its job. If you're not, it's because your CV is not doing its job 99 times out of 100. And the reasons why it might not be doing the job is because you're probably not building a business case. Now, you'll probably have a feeling for this. You either have the stats to prove this already, or if you're not active in the market, you're starting to think probably, yeah, I don't think my CV is strong enough in the marketplace. Now, you may get lucky. There may be some gem on it that somebody will pick up on, and you'll get interviews even though you've got a CV that's technically not strong. And that has happened sometimes. For those in IT, you'll remember this. Most of you remember this anyway. If in 1998 or 1999 you'd have written on a piece of toilet paper, I can solve your Y2K problem, and stuck it through the front door of a fair few CEOs' front doors, or CTOs or CFOs, you'd have probably got a few phone calls, as long as you put your phone number on the bottom of the toilet paper, of course. You'd have probably got some calls, and it's all about relevance, of course, because at that moment in time there was a desperate need for people to come and fix a problem or a perceived problem. You can't do that these days. You wouldn't get away with saying, I'm a great project manager, please ring me, on a piece of toilet paper. You'd probably get a call, but it'd be from people to lock you up or something. So it's all about relevance and appropriateness in the marketplace. So if you're not getting the interest and action and traction with your current CV, it's probably because you're not presenting people with a strong enough business case. There's not a clear justification as to why they should bother picking up the phone or sending you an email. And that's probably because you're not providing enough evidence to support why people should be interested in you. So now you've got enough of the clues, you can start to work out whether you should be doing anything about it. Only if you're getting sufficient interviews and you're happy with that level should you do nothing. Only if that's the case. Otherwise, you either fix it yourself or you get some help. And as I said earlier, I would implore you, please, please do something, because it won't change, the situation won't change overnight without you doing something. Now, for those people that fall into the latter option, option 3, getting professional help, right at the end of this session, there's some massive discounts that we offer people who've attended our webinars, and they're time limited. So the downside, they're time limited. And I'll cover those off later, but there is a benefit for having endured this session. Just a few quick things before moving on to LinkedIn. I'm not going to go through each of these because we're short on time now. It's important, two most important things on this slide are, in terms of just general bits and pieces, spelling. You'll be surprised how many people go to market with grammatical or spelling mistakes. So check and check again. In the current marketplace, it's dead easy for a recruiter or hiring manager to reject somebody because of a spelling mistake, and I can't think of many people who'd say to them, is that important? It's 1,500 applicants for a job, well, it doesn't matter, 150 applicants for a job. If one or two of them have made a spelling mistake, it doesn't matter whether they're technically perfect for the job, nobody will ever find that out. It's just too easy for somebody to say, I rejected them because they couldn't spell this. And most hiring managers are going to say, absolutely the right decision. They're not going to argue it. Interestingly, most people who put on their CV attention to detail, which you shouldn't have on your CV, interestingly, it's another behavioural trait. It's a classic. Every time I get a CV and it says strong attention to detail on it, it makes me look extra harder for a mistake. And 50% of the time, and it is that much of a stat, 50% of the time I always find a mistake of somebody who's put on their CV strong attention to detail or words to the same effect. It constantly amazes me, and it's the worst thing. So having said you can't prove these things on a CV, you can anti-prove them, that's such a thing. So there are plenty of people who go out saying strong attention to detail. You can't prove that, even if you had a 100% accurate CV. Nobody will link the two, but I guarantee they'll absolutely nail you if you've got a mistake on your CV of any consequence, because they'll say, how strong attention to detail have you got? Oh, I think I've got real strong attention to detail. Well, what's this? What's this spello here? I mean, you never get to explain it because you'll have never got an interview, unfortunately, or very unlikely to have done. The other thing I said I'd talk about, number of pages, bit of an urban myth surrounding this one. In the UK and most of Western Europe, there is no need to have a CV of a particular length. There's no evidence to support that at all, unless you have specifically been asked to submit a CV on X number of pages, which is rare. In the US, it's slightly different. It's still a bit of an urban myth, but there is more validity to having, say, a 2-page CV. There's more of an undercurrent supporting that. But everywhere else, pretty much, it is genuinely an urban myth. The key is good content. Most of the CVs we write for our clients are probably 3 pages. We have written some 4 and we've written some 2. We've gone either side of that as well, but the heartland is 3 pages. Nobody's ever come back and said that was the wrong length of document. What you'll find is you get criticised for content, not length of content. Okay, very briefly, LinkedIn, before we sort of move on to questions. So remember that statistic I said earlier, that the majority of recruiters and hiring managers will judge you purely on the contents of your CV, which is true and still the case. After they've made the decision on who to interview, but before they actually select people and call them in, the vast majority of that vast majority will be checking you out on LinkedIn. Truth be told, they'll probably be looking on other social media as well, particularly the bigger the employer, the more checking they'll probably do. They may even have some outsourced facility to do a bit of checking, particularly for middle management, senior management roles. But as far as the context of this evening is concerned, you know, Facebook and Twitter is out with this discussion. If you mess up on that, then you mess up on that, but that's not business related. LinkedIn is a professional business network, so it's important that if you're going to have a presence, you get that right as well. Our argument, generally speaking, would be you probably ought to have a LinkedIn profile unless you've got very strong reasons, not because we particularly trumpet LinkedIn, but so many recruiters and hiring managers use it now, and a lot of people underestimate that. The more people found a job via LinkedIn in 2012 than they did via Monster.com globally, and Monster.com I think is the biggest job board. So that's clear where LinkedIn is heading. So if you want a profile, if you want to get noticed by recruiters and hiring managers, particularly in Europe and the UK and the US, of course, then it's a strong argument to say you really ought to be on LinkedIn. It also applies, obviously that's to people who are active. You can't just wake up one morning, set up a profile and expect it to work its magic. So if you've got a view to the middle or longer term, it still probably makes sense to be on LinkedIn to build credibility, presence, and for people to recognize that you've been on it for a while and look established. So it's just good to be on it. But we do accept some people have an issue with it or would rather not be on it, but that's your call at the end of the day. However, just as people tend to go hideously wrong with their CV, guess what? Most people, if they've got a bad CV, they just port it across to LinkedIn, literally copy and paste great swathes of it, if not the whole document. So if you've got a bad CV and you stick it on LinkedIn, you're just replicating that badness. And it is not as simple as that. To do it properly, LinkedIn requires a different approach. One common denominator, though, content is key. Don't get confused by or persuaded by LinkedIn to submit loads of information. If you know LinkedIn, you'll know, and I don't have the time to go into the gory detail, I'm afraid, tonight, but if you set up a profile, if you know anything about it, you know that LinkedIn scores your profile and gives you an indicator which goes sort of basic, intermediate, advanced, expert, all-star, or something like that. It's some kind of levels to your profile. Don't be fooled into thinking having the highest score will make your profile necessarily better. I'm afraid it's not that complex or sophisticated yet anyway. So although it's, again, a bit tongue-in-cheek, if you've not got a photograph on LinkedIn, again, there's no reason why you should definitely have a photograph, but if you've not got one and then you add one, your profile will be incremented slightly. Whether it tips you over the edge of a classification or not, I don't really know, to be honest, but it can influence it and give you a higher rating. The trouble is that picture could be of a monkey. Now, that's not going to help your recruitment chances, but it will give you a stronger profile in LinkedIn's view. So clearly that's not right. And the same applies to lots of other content. You could fill the boxes with all sorts and invent all sorts of stuff. Technically, you'd have a strong profile because you've given LinkedIn lots of information, but it's not going to help you one iota in getting interviews. And there's plenty of people out there with expert or all-star profiles whose profile is actually hideous and their message is very, very ineffective. So don't get suckered into that. The content is really important. It's all about the message you send your target audience. And if there are disconnects between your CV and the profile, that's bad. If it can create more questions for you that you might get an interview if you get that far, that are awkward, that's bad. You need to make sure the message is the key thing. The key areas you need to look, so just as there are 3 strong areas on your CV, the professional summary, the key skills and the career highlights, they built your business case. You get them right, you're a long way to getting more interviews. Same is true with LinkedIn to a degree, although they have more flexibility. One area you really need to be careful of is your professional headline. I'll show you what that is in a minute. It's the bit of text underneath your name. Come on to it shortly. And then the summary. So those are the first two things out of the three things you need to get right on LinkedIn: professional headline and summary. Now, just putting quickly on screen Matt's profile, just to keep it consistent. The professional headline is now highlighted, or sort of highlighted. It's the text immediately under his name, starting MD. What that ought not to be is just an amalgam of your job title and current employer, which it will be by default if you chose it to be so. LinkedIn sort of helpfully says, would you like me to populate your professional headline with your current place of work? Now, if you've got an odd job title, that doesn't really help you. If you've got a very generic job title, or you work at an employer that hasn't got a great reputation or nobody's ever heard of, it doesn't work to your advantage. So put something more compelling in there. It ought to be, in effect, your value proposition. That's what needs to go in here. The summary is sort of like, but not the same, but sort of like the opening summary on your CV, assuming, again, that you're going with an opening summary like I've described. There's nothing about your enthusiasm, dedication. It's all about what you are, what's your value proposition, what are you good at, and linking that to the hot skills in the market. But it's written in a different tense. Again, I don't have the time to go into why, the reasons why and whatnot, but the style is slightly different from the CV. Just trust me on that. You'll notice Matt here is using the word I. That's deliberate. On his CV, he wasn't. That's deliberate. Very subtle, but it does make a difference. It's quite important. So the two key areas so far on LinkedIn: professional headline, that can be quite compelling. What it ought not to be, as I've highlighted, it ought not to be currently seeking, available immediately, available now, or anything like that, because that infers a level of desperation. However truthful that may be, it doesn't send the right message. It ought to be your value proposition. If somebody's interested in you, they ought to be interested in you because you've got something to offer them in return. As far as jobs are concerned, then just a summary, so nowhere near as much detail as you have on a CV. So again, where people go wrong is they dump what they've got on their CV, which is probably ineffective anyway and too lengthy. They dump that into LinkedIn. They provide warts and all on every single job they've done. It just looks like a hideous mess. Gives away all sorts of things like your age, the amount of experience that you've got. If you've not done it particularly well or tidily, it looks like a right old mess. So just a summary of jobs, a hook to say, I've got this skill from these kind of people. You want to be suggesting, could be worth looking at me. I've got a strong professional headline, got a good opening summary. I've highlighted some skills which you can do as well on LinkedIn. And incidentally, this is where I've worked, but I'm not going to give you all the gory details, and that's deliberate. You just want a summary of stuff. And then the third area, like on the CV, there were 3 strong areas to work on. The third area on LinkedIn is called projects, and a lot of people don't even know this section exists. And they certainly tend not to use it. Projects is a really useful area where you can take the career highlights from the CV and use them to put the evidence on your LinkedIn profile. So on screen now is my profile because I have to go into edit mode now and I don't have access to Matt's. So if you go into edit profile, if you know your LinkedIn profile, edit profile, you get a screen a bit like this. Down the right-hand side somewhere, as I've now highlighted, there's, and it depends on how much information you've got on your own profile, but down that right-hand side somewhere there's an area called projects. You click on that, you get a screen like this, and you can create a project, quite a large number of projects you want, but again, if you worked with 3 to 5, that's a nice, meaningful number, enough to give people evidence that you're capable of doing what you're claiming you're good at. You give the project a name, so nice, punchy, compelling headline. You then use the text. If we were writing your CV, we'd take one of the career highlights and we would literally dump the text in here this time. That's when it works fine. So the STAR methodology, remember that enterprise rent-a-car example we talked about, you'd take that, you'd slot that in here and you'd call it something like, you know, business turnaround or dramatic increase in profitability. You give it a reasonably punchy headline to attract people's eyes, and then you'd have the text to back it up in the STAR methodology. And then finally, so that's projects, and then finally, with LinkedIn, you can reorder the sections. Now, by default, LinkedIn gives you it's a workable profile. I mean, it's not hideous by any means, as long as the content's right. But you can drag and drop the sections, and we would reorder the sections. Again, I don't have time to go into the minutiae of detail about that. Suffice to say, you can reorder the sections and make it a more compelling business case and a nice flow to it, whereas most people stick with the default. The danger with that is it tends to lead you into your employment history, your experience, as LinkedIn calls it, too quickly. So it's worth reordering the sections to delay that point. Because for a lot of people, who they currently work for is not the most compelling message. And if you know that that's an issue or there's a gap in your career, you can manipulate that slightly, partly on the CV, as we've seen, and certainly on LinkedIn by not putting so much information and by delaying the point at which people hit it. So make the most of the tools at your disposal. So that's LinkedIn. Just briefly, for those now who are starting to think, okay, if you need to do something, that's fine. As I said, the worst thing would be you don't do anything if you know you've got a problem. If you're going to do something yourself, that's great. You should have enough hints and tips, albeit at a bit of a pace, to give you some steer and guidance on what to do. For those people that are thinking, maybe we should invest in this and get this sorted properly, you need to make that call. The way that kind of works, just so you know, is that we're in the business of rewriting profiles and CVs. We don't amend things, so it's not possible. It's not technically possible to take a CV, trim it, tweak it, and then give you somehow a better CV back. I'm afraid if you're going to do that, you have to start root and branch and start from fresh. So we do that. We write everything from scratch. The way we do that is we spend whatever time it takes, but typically a couple of hours on the telephone or Skype, extracting information from our clients in the nicest possible way, which gives us a whole heap of raw data. From that raw data, we can then work with you and make sure your career objective is valid, and just do a bit of a sanity check on it, if you like. If you don't already know or are unclear about the value proposition that you have, we'll refine that and make sure that that can be articulated both on the CV and on LinkedIn. So we're not talking about just taking your current CV, playing around with it and sending it back to you. This is a complete repackaging of the message you're sending out to the marketplace. As I said earlier, if you get that right, you suddenly go from having very little or no interest to having lots of interest, and you're exactly the same person. You've got exactly the same skill set, but your message is just far more effective and being seen as so. And we can help you with all of that. And we've done this time and time and time again with people who've struggled in the marketplace. As far as dragging out the career highlights, we can assess the kind of jobs you're going for, where you're trying to pitch yourself, and say, okay, Joe Bloggs, you need to give us some evidence in these areas. Can you do that? Yes, I can. Okay, let's talk about some examples. We go through all of that and build up the career highlights so that we can, in effect, build a really strong business case for you. And if you've got a stronger business case, it will get you more interviews. So it solves that problem, and it will secure you interviews to better jobs. So there's a double benefit, really. For those that want to just get a job or a contract or some kind of opportunity, it will increase the chances of that happening. For those that are looking maybe to just push themselves up the next stage of the ladder, so they go from, say, project manager to a PMO, or a junior to a senior, or a middle to a senior, those kind of things can be far more effectively achieved if you present the right business case to your target audience. As long as if it's a stretch, that's okay. As long as it's attainable realistically, then you can put a better business case together and it will make that happen. Now, if those work for you, you can do the math then. You can figure out what does that equate to? What benefit would I get as an individual if I got a contract earlier, or a better contract, or a job quicker, or a better paid job quicker? You can then do the maths and say, there's a value we can attach to that. And as far as a special offer that I presented and promised you earlier, the way it works is that for anybody with more than 7 years work experience, these prices apply. If you've got less than that, then we probably need to have a separate conversation. But for people with a career of more than 7 years, ordinarily, to write your CV and your LinkedIn profile from scratch and go through the process I talked about would be $349 plus VAT, so not an inconsiderable amount of money. Even when we reduce it, we recognise it still requires a fairly hefty investment, but that's the way you have to look at it. if we could get you a job for doing a day's work, in effect, because it takes a day to talk with you and to rewrite the CV, a day's work at 275 plus VAT to sort your LinkedIn profile and your CV is not actually that bad if you compare it to getting your car serviced, getting a gardener around for a day, getting a decorator, even childcare. It's a reasonable return, and it's the best way you can spend that money because you will get a return on it because you get a job quicker or a better job. But you have to do that maths. So there's quite a saving on offer. The downside, as I said, apart from the fact that you have to pay for it, is that it's time limited until almost the stroke of midnight at the end of this week. The way you get hold of that is to visit this website link, which I shall copy and paste into the chat room, as well as the question and answer bit, if you just bear with me. I'll try and multitask. And you click on that link and it will take you to a web page. In fact, it will take you to this web page, which I shall show you on screen, just so you get familiar. So if you are interested, if you hit a page that looks like that, you know it's legit and what we talked about. That's our website. You click on the Buy Now button, fill in the details, make your payment. We'll contact you and get the ball moving and the process moving. If you're interested in the offer but you don't actually want to use it for a week or two, that's fine. You're not obliged to have to use it anytime. We've had somebody actually order, for some bizarre reason, 12 months ahead. Quite why, I don't know, but a lot of people say, look, I'm busy right now, I'm tied up with something, I could use the service, it's a great offer, but can I use it in 2 months' time or at the end of April or whenever? And we say, fine, that's absolutely fine. Once you've bought the service, you can keep it tucked away for as long as you need it. Failing that, the normal turnaround time is 5 working days. It's quite a quick process if you need it to be. For the first 10 people that order, you get an extra package of benefits, but it is strictly the first 10, and no exceptions to the rule, unless you've had a technical problem paying or something. And that is, you also get a free cover letter and access to our interview coaching system, which is a really nifty piece of kit that allows you to practice competency-based questions in the privacy of your own home, and that lot's worth 95 quid. So between the two offers, you could save 185 quid. Alternatively, if you fancy having a go yourself and you just want to dip a toe in the water, we do a very cheap DIY pack of things. I mean, it really does put the onus on you to do the legwork, but if you fancy a bash at that, that's also available on the website for 18 quid, including the VAT. So that's the end of the session. So I hope you found that very useful and got something out of it. I know we had a lot of information to cover, and it was a fairly rapid zap through CVs and LinkedIn. But I'm afraid there's no, as you probably gathered, it's not the work of a moment. And if you think you can spend a Sunday afternoon in front of the telly writing a CV, unless you're very good, it just doesn't happen like that, I'm afraid. There's a lot more to it. Now, I promise I'd answer any questions. So if you just give me a couple of seconds, I'm going to freeze the screen and stop recording, and then I'm going to move on to the questions that people have asked. If you want to ask any questions still, we've got plenty of time to do exactly that.